picture this. You're at a family dinner, or maybe you're just scrolling through your favorite social media feed, and you find yourself locked in this argument.
Oh, we've all been there. It's exhausting.
Right, and you're laying out your points logically. You have the data, you have the timeline, you know you're right. But the person you're talking to just says something so profoundly sideways, so completely, like, unhinged from reality, that your brain momentarily short-circuits.
Yeah, you get that deer in the headlights feeling.
Exactly. In your bones, that they are cheating the rules of logic. You can feel it. But in that highly pressurized, really frustrating second, you just can't articulate exactly how they're cheating. I mean, they just built a bridge out of spaghetti, and somehow they're standing on it, declaring victory.
It is a universally maddening experience. And, it happens because everyday human communication is just incredibly messy.
It's chaotic.
Totally chaotic. If you study the ancient philosophers, you see them killing forests worth of trees trying to determine what we can know to be true. They were creating these pristine, sterile environments for logic.
Like lab conditions for thinking.
Exactly. But the moment you take that logic out of the textbook and drop it into a PTA meeting or, I don't know, a political debate or a boardroom,
It all just falls apart.
yeah, it gets instantly contaminated by ego, emotion, and just, massive cognitive blind spots.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive today. We are taking a massive stack of material for you. Everything from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and the essays of Mark Manson to behavioral psychology frameworks and even battle-tested debate tactics from Reddit trenches.
The Reddit trenches are actually fascinating for this.
Oh, they're incredible. So we're building you a mental toolkit. We're going to decode the architecture of these bad arguments, which we call logical fallacies. But we're going way beyond just naming them.
Right, because just naming them doesn't really help you.
No, it doesn't. We want to unpack the evolutionary and psychological reasons why intelligent people use them, and critically, how you can disarm them in real time without losing your mind.
That last part is so vital. Mastering this toolkit isn't about becoming, an insufferable debate bro who just dunks on people online.
Please don't be that person.
Yeah, nobody likes that person. It's really a defense mechanism. It's about auditing the information diet you consume daily, protecting yourself from manipulation, and carving a clearer path to the truth in a world that thrives on, well, just noise.
So let's start with the foundation. To figure out how an argument collapses, we have to look at the two fundamentally different ways they're built, right? The formal fallacy versus the informal fallacy.
Think of it as the difference between a flaw in the blueprints versus a flaw in the building materials. A formal fallacy is a defect in the actual structural form of a deductive argument.
Like the blueprint itself is drawn wrong.
Spot on. It's a glitch in the sheer math of the logic. If you map the argument out using symbols like A, B, and C, the invalidity is obvious, completely, regardless of what words you plug into those letters.
Okay, give me an example of the math breaking down like that.
So one of the classic structural failures we see in the philosophy texts is called affirming the consequent. The blueprint looks like this. If P, then QQ is true. Therefore, P must be true.
Okay, let's translate the algebra into English because my brain is already hurting.
Fair enough. Let's say I claim, if I call you a swine, then I call you an animal. If I call you an animal, then I am speaking the truth. Therefore, if I call you a swine, I am speaking the truth.
Wow. Okay, that feels like a trap. The structure is completely severed from reality.
It is. Another great illustration of this blueprint failing is the knight's armor example from the sources. Knights wear armor. You are wearing armor, therefore you are a knight.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the structural error is assuming that because the outcome is true, you are wearing armor, the initial condition must also be the only path to that outcome.
But like a city guard wears armor.
Right. Or a wealthy merchant might buy armor for a costume party. The logic fails based purely on its own internal mathematical rules.
So a formal fallacy is essentially a calculator glitching and outputting 2 + 2 = 5. The internal mechanism is busted.
Exactly.
But when we look at the real world, formal fallacies aren't really what make us want to pull our hair out at Thanksgiving. We're usually dealing with informal fallacies. And if a formal fallacy is a broken calculator, an informal fallacy is like someone trying to measure the distance to the moon using a meat thermometer.
That captures the absurdity perfectly. The structural math of their argument might actually look completely fine on paper. Like, if I use a measuring device, I will get a distance. This thermometer is a measuring device. Therefore, I will get a distance.
The math is structurally valid.
Yeah, the math is fine.
But the actual content, the materials they're using in the real world, makes absolutely zero sense.
That's exactly the issue. Informal fallacies are logically unsound due to the context, the ambiguity of natural language, or just a complete lack of well-grounded premises. They rely on emotional manipulation and irrelevant information to basically bridge the gaps in their reasoning.
Before we start categorizing these informal fallacies, I think we have to draw a hard boundary line between a logical fallacy and a cognitive bias.
Oh, absolutely. This gets confused all the time.
Right, because if you spend enough time reading about psychology or communication, you see those two terms used interchangeably, and they're doing very different jobs.
They're intimately linked, but you're right, they are not the same thing. A cognitive bias is a psychological tendency. It's an invisible glitch in your biological software.
Like a processing error.
Yeah. Take recency bias, for example. Your brain artificially inflates the importance of a piece of news simply because you heard it 10 minutes ago, versus a foundational fact you learned 10 years ago. That is a bias.
So it's the silent processing error happening inside the skull.
Exactly. Now, a logical fallacy is the external output. It's the actual verbalized argumentative mistake that occurs because of that bias.
Oh, I get it. The bias is the psychological urge, and the fallacy is the flawed argument you construct to justify that urge.
That's a great way to put it.
So if cognitive biases are the silent software bugs, informal fallacies are the chaotic error messages that pop up on the screen when we open our mouths.
Yep, the error messages we force everyone else to deal with.
And because these informal fallacies rely on the messy, emotional reality of human interaction, it makes total sense that the most common and arguably most socially destructive fallacy is the one that skips the argument entirely and goes straight for the throat.
Ah, the ad hominem, the attack against the person.
It is the absolute bread and butter of modern discourse. I mean, Mark Manson has this brilliant breakdown in his essays where he traces this all the way back to the playground.
Oh, the playground example is so true.
Yeah, you're losing a debate about whose turn it is on the swing. You've run out of logical defenses, so you just yell, well, you're a smelly goat face. And I don't listen to smelly goat faces.
Classic.
And you storm off feeling like you won the debate, but you've addressed precisely nothing about the swing.
And the sad thing is, adult discourse is often just the goat-faced defense dressed up in a tailored suit.
It really is.
Instead of addressing the evidence, an arguer attacks their opponent's character, their hygiene, their background, or their motives. We see examples in historical philosophy texts where brilliant essays on Kepler's astronomy from the 1600s were dismissed out of hand.
Wait, really? By who?
By critics who didn't even challenge the math of planetary motion. They just pointed out the author was 15 years old.
Wow. Just entirely dismissing the work because of age. Or looking at modern environmental debates. Someone presents a massive peer-reviewed data set on carbon emissions, and the opponent responds by calling them a dirty, lazy hippie.
Right. And the data set remains completely untouched.
The numbers don't change based on the hygiene of the person holding the spreadsheet.
They don't. But you know, the ad hominem isn't always a blunt instrument like that. It actually evolves into some incredibly sophisticated subtypes that can fool even very critical thinkers.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
The first one is the circumstantial ad hominem. This is claiming the arguer only holds a position because it aligns with their own self-interest.
Like when an industrialist funds a scientific study showing that a new chemical plant is perfectly safe for the local river. The immediate instinct is to say, well, of course this study says it's safe. The guy building the plant paid for it.
Right. And as a human being with survival instincts, that suspicion is entirely justified. But logically, technically speaking, it is a fallacy if you reject the findings without actually examining the methodology of the study.
Wait, really? But it's so obviously biased.
It might be. But the chemistry data might also be flawlessly executed. The motivation of the billionaire funding the study does not inherently alter the molecular structure of the river water.
That is deeply counterintuitive, though. I mean, we're so wired to look for the hidden motive.
We are, which brings us to another subtype that weaponizes our sense of fairness. It's the tu quoque fallacy. It literally translates to you too, or the appeal to hypocrisy.
The ultimate who are you to talk defense.
Exactly. Let's say a colleague pulls you aside and says, you really shouldn't be taking office supplies home. It's technically stealing. And you fire back, oh, please, we all know you fudged your expense reports last quarter to get a fat bonus.
I mean, the colleague might be a massive hypocrite.
Yeah.
And a thief.
Sure. But your brain has completely shifted the spotlight. Pointing out their hypocrisy does not magically make your theft of office supplies morally or logically correct. It just means there are two thieves in the room.
It's a masterful deflection technique.
Hmm.
And taking deflection to its absolute psychological extreme, we find bulverism.
Oh, bulverism is fascinating.
This term was actually coined by C.S. Lewis. It describes the act of assuming your opponent is wrong, bypassing the argument entirely, and instead psychoanalyzing why they are so hopelessly wrong.
It's so arrogant when you think about it.
It is. You don't say your economic policy is flawed because of X. You say you only support that economic policy because you have unhealed trauma regarding authority figures.
Oh, that is so insidious. You don't even grant them the dignity of having an argument to dismantle. You just treat them like a patient who needs to be diagnosed.
Right. Or you deploy the closely related ergo dicido, the traitorous critic fallacy. Therefore, I leave. Instead of answering a critique of a system or a country, you just tell the critic, if you don't like it, you should just pack up and leave.
Which, again, answers absolutely nothing about the critique itself.
Okay, I have to throw a wrench into this machinery right now because I am sensing a real-world disconnect here.
Okay, throw the wrench.
Is attacking the person always a logical fallacy? Because if a guy with zero medical background corners me in a parking lot and tries to sell me a quantum healing crystal for $5,000, isn't it entirely logical for me to attack his complete lack of credentials?
That's a fair point.
Or what if we're talking about a politician who has a meticulously documented 30-year history of bold-faced lying? Are you telling me I have to ignore their character and mathematically calculate the validity of every single word that comes out of their mouth?
That is a phenomenal pushback, and it lands right at the center of a major philosophical debate. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy actually spends a lot of time on this exact tension.
Oh, really? So I'm not crazy.
No, you're not. What you're describing is the rhetorical approach to the ad hominem. If we go all the way back to Aristotle, he recognized that ethos, the credibility, character, and track record of a speaker, is a massive, unavoidable factor in practical communication.
So Aristotle's giving me permission to walk away from the crystal salesman in the parking lot.
He is enthusiastically giving you permission. If a speaker has a blatant vested interest, a documented history of deceit, or zero expertise in the field they're discussing, attacking their credibility is a completely valid heuristic.
A heuristic? Like a mental shortcut?
Right. It is a necessary mental shortcut. We simply do not have the time, the computational power, or the lifespan to meticulously analyze the structural logic of every single claim we encounter. We have to outsource some of that work to the credibility of the source.
So where's the boundary then? When does relying on that valid shortcut cross over into committing a fallacy?
The boundary is relevance. The personal attack only becomes a fallacy when it is entirely irrelevant to the specific premise being argued.
Give me an example of that.
Okay, if a politician with a 30-year history of lying tells you that a new tax bill will generate exactly $1 million, you can absolutely doubt that claim based on their character. They are presenting facts, and they have a history of fabricating facts.
Right. The character flaw directly impacts the claim.
Precisely. But if that same notoriously lying politician says we should build a new dog park because dogs need exercise, and you reply, I'm not listening to you because you have terrible taste in music and you lied about the budget in 1998.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
Right. You have crossed into a fallacy. Your attack on their character does absolutely nothing to invalidate the premise that dogs require exercise.
That makes perfect sense. The attack has to actually sever the load-bearing pillars of the specific claim.
Exactly.
But let's say you're in an argument and you realize you can't successfully attack the person's credibility. Like, their reputation is pristine, their expertise is undeniable. What we see happens next is a tactical pivot.
Yeah.
If they can't attack the person and they can't beat the actual argument, they attack a fake, incredibly fragile version of the argument.
Oh, yes. We are stepping into the realm of misdirection tactics.
This is the domain of the straw man, which is basically the reigning champion of internet discourse.
Without a doubt.
The straw man is when you grossly, almost comically, misrepresent your opponent's argument to make it significantly easier to knock down. You aren't fighting a heavyweight boxer anymore. You're building a scarecrow, beating it up, and declaring yourself the champion of the world.
And you see it everywhere because it takes almost zero intellectual effort to execute, but it requires massive effort to counter.
So much effort.
Right. Imagine someone stands up at a city council meeting and says, I believe we need to look at reducing the police budget slightly so we can allocate more funds to after-school youth programs.
Very measured.
Yeah, very measured. But the immediate straw man response is, oh, so you want to abolish the police entirely, let criminals roam the streets and watch our city burn to the ground?
Or a much lower stakes version. I think we should introduce healthy salads to the school cafeteria menu. And the straw man is, you want to ban pizza forever and starve our children.
It's so melodramatic.
It is, and
Yeah.
it's deeply frustrating because the moment they deploy it, you suddenly find yourself frantically defending a position you never even held.
And within this category of misdirection, there is a highly tactical, much more sophisticated variation called the Mott and Bailey fallacy.
This sounds like medieval warfare.
It is entirely based on medieval warfare.
Wait, really?
Yeah, a Mott and Bailey was a specific type of early castle design. The bailey is a large, open courtyard down at the bottom of a hill. It's very productive, lots of livestock and commerce, highly desirable to live in, but it is incredibly expansive and very difficult to defend when attacked.
Lots of open ground to cover.
Exactly. Now, the Mott, on the other hand, is a small, heavily fortified stone tower built on top of a steep man-made hill. It is incredibly safe, highly defensible, but it's cramped. You can't live your whole productive life up in the Mott.
So how does a medieval real estate problem apply to an argument?
An arguer will conflate two different positions. They start by advancing the bailey, a highly controversial, radical claim that gets a lot of attention, rallies their base, but is logically indefensible.
Like what?
Let's say someone claims all modern medicine is a toxic scam designed to kill us. That is the bailey.
A massive, exposed claim.
Right. When a doctor challenges that claim and says, wait, antibiotics have saved billions of lives, here's the data, the arguer abandons the bailey and immediately retreats to a very modest, universally acceptable claim.
Oh, I see where this is going.
They say, look, all I'm saying is that we should be mindful of overprescribing medications and look at holistic preventative care.
Which almost everyone would agree with. It's a completely reasonable mot.
But here's the trick. Once the doctor agrees with the mot and walks away, the arguer marches right back down into the bailey and continues claiming all medicine is a toxic scam, acting as if they successfully defended that radical claim.
Wow.
It's a bait and switch that allows people to hold on to extreme views without ever having to logically defend them.
That is infuriating to even think about.
Yeah.
And closely related to that kind of tactical retreat is the ultimate derailment tactic, the red herring.
Ah, yes. Where the straw man distorts the topic, the red herring abandons the topic entirely.
Just throws it out the window.
Yep.
It's introducing a completely irrelevant, usually highly emotionally charged issue to distract everyone from the original point of failure.
The classic example is two people having a deeply nuanced, logical debate about the environmental impact of industrial meat farming. They're discussing carbon footprints, water usage, supply chains, and suddenly, someone who is losing the argument blurts out, well, you know, Hitler was a vegetarian.
The red herring par excellence. Hitler's dietary habits have absolutely zero bearing on the methane output of modern cattle farms. But it introduces a figure of such intense historical evil that it immediately derails the entire conversation.
Right, because you can't just ignore it, so you have to address it, and suddenly you are arguing about World War II history instead of agriculture.
It's completely hijacked.
In the legal world, they actually call this the Chewbacca defense from that old South Park episode.
Oh, I remember that. And in political strategy, it's known as the dead cat strategy. The idea is, if you are losing an argument at a dinner party, you just throw a metaphorical dead cat on the table. It's disgusting, it's shocking, and suddenly nobody is talking about the argument you were losing anymore. They're only talking about the dead cat.
So when we look at misdirection tactics, the straw man, the Mott and Bailey, the red herring, we have to ask why they are so spectacularly effective. They work because they hijack the audience's emotional bandwidth.
It's an energy drain.
Completely. The real damage of a straw man isn't that the logic is poorly constructed. The damage is that it forces the original speaker to spend all of their cognitive energy and time defending themselves against ridiculous phantom characterizations.
It's exhausting.
It really is. It acts as a denial of service attack on the conversation, completely halting any forward progress on the actual issue.
So misdirection is all about hijacking where we look. We're forced to look at the dead cat or the scarecrow. But what happens when the flaw isn't in our focus, but deeply embedded in our biological wiring? Because the sources we're looking at highlight a whole different class of fallacies that don't rely on distraction at all. They rely on how the human brain naturally processes patterns, causes, and probabilities.
Right. We're moving from tactical misdirection to biological pattern glitches. To understand these, we really have to look at evolutionary psychology. The human brain is a meaning-making machine. It desperately desires order, simplicity, and causality.
Because that keeps us alive.
Exactly. On the ancient savanna, if you heard a rustle in the tall grass, your brain immediately connected a cause to that pattern. Rustle in grass equals lion.
If you assumed the rustle was just random wind and you were wrong, you got eaten.
Yep. We survived by hyperactively detecting agency and patterns. But in a modern, complex society, that survival mechanism backfires constantly. The most common backfire is the false cause fallacy, often summarized by the old statistics mantra, correlation is not causation.
Our brains see two things happen in close proximity, and the ancient savanna wiring kicks in. We automatically assume one caused the other.
The macroeconomic examples of this are endless. A new mayor takes office in a city. Within 3 weeks, the local unemployment rate spikes by 2%. A political opponent points at the data and shouts, the new mayor's policies are destroying jobs.
But 3 weeks isn't even enough time for a municipal policy to take effect. It completely ignores global market trends, interest rate hikes, or, the failures of the previous administration. It just takes two dots that are close together on a timeline and draws a thick permanent line between them.
And a really vivid, slightly more manipulative variation of this is the Texas sharpshooter fallacy.
Oh, I love the visual analogy for this
It's
one.
great, isn't it?
Imagine a guy standing in front of a massive wooden barn. He takes a gun, closes his eyes, and just fires randomly all over the broad side of the barn. Complete chaos. Bullet holes everywhere.
No pattern whatsoever.
Right. Then he walks up to the barn, inspects the damage, and finds the one small area where 3 or 4 bullet holes happen to be clustered tightly together by pure chance. He takes a can of red paint, draws a perfect bullseye around that tight cluster, turns to you and says, look at that grouping. I'm a master sharpshooter.
It perfectly illustrates the fallacy. It's the act of improperly asserting a cause or a pattern to explain a completely random cluster of data. You see this in bad science and terrible journalism all the time.
Oh, all the time.
A researcher looks at a massive, chaotic data set, ignores all the profound differences and random noise, highlights a few accidental similarities, and claims they have discovered a profound, overarching truth about human nature.
Our brains just violently reject randomness. We also seem to have a very low tolerance for nuance and complexity, which drives us right into the false dilemma or the black or white fallacy.
This is the artificial restriction of choice. It's presenting only two extreme options when a massive spectrum of middle ground actually exists. Like, either you agree with this new surveillance law or you are on the side of the terrorists.
It's an extortion tactic. It forces the listener into a corner, forcing them to accept a bad premise just to avoid being labeled as an extremist. And if you refuse to accept their forced choice, they usually hit you with the slippery slope.
Ah, yes, the failure to map the future accurately.
It is the completely unfounded assumption that one minor isolated action will inevitably trigger a catastrophic chain reaction. The internet forums have a hilarious hyperbolic illustration of this. If you let a neighborhood kid retrieve his baseball from your front yard, tomorrow he'll be playing on your porch, and the next day he will be in your kitchen eating your babies.
Well, it escalated to cannibalism rather quickly.
But you hear slightly dialed-down versions of this at every local town hall meeting. If we allow them to build a small bike lane on this street, next thing you know, cars will be banned entirely, local businesses will collapse, and the city will become a dystopian ghost town. It jumps from step A to step Z without providing any logical mechanism for steps B through Y.
And if the slippery slope is a failure to map the future, circular reasoning is a failure to map the present. It's the brain trying to build a foundation out of midair.
Also known as begging the question. The conclusion is just smuggled right into the premise. Mark Manson gave the simplest, dizziest example. Carl is a total dork because he always tries to pretend he's not a dork, which is exactly what a dork would do.
The argument relies entirely on the very thing it's attempting to prove. It's a closed loop of logic that goes nowhere.
Here is where we really need to pause and look at the bigger picture. We have just laid out a massive catalog of structural failures, leaping to wild conclusions, seeing patterns that don't exist, forcing false choices, spinning in logical circles. If these cognitive leaps are so fundamentally broken, how are we the apex species on the planet?
Next question.
Right. Why is the human brain so incredibly eager to jump to these false conclusions if they are so demonstrably bad for us?
That is the pivotal question that bridges logic and psychology. To answer it, We have to move away from the structure of the arguments and look at the internal architecture of the person making the argument. These fallacies are not just accidents.
What do you mean?
They're not merely moments of low intelligence or bad education. They are deeply ingrained, highly effective psychological defense mechanisms
Defense mechanisms against what?
against pain, specifically psychological discomfort. In the late 1950s, a psychologist named Leon Festinger introduced cognitive dissonance theory. The core premise is that when a human being encounters evidence, ideas, or behaviors that directly contradict their deeply held beliefs, their worldview, or their core identity, they experience acute psychological tension.
It's not just a passing thought. It literally feels bad physically. It's that tightening in your chest, the flush of heat in your face, when someone presents undeniable proof that you're wrong about something you care deeply about.
It is an amygdala hijack. Your brain processes that contradictory information not as a math problem to be solved, but as a physical threat to your survival.
Yeah.
And the brain wants to resolve that painful discomfort as quickly as possible.
Because it hurts.
Right. But changing your foundational worldview is incredibly hard. It requires immense cognitive effort and emotional humility. So the brain takes the path of least resistance. It filters, distorts, or rejects the new information to protect the existing belief.
This is the aha moment right here. This is where fallacies act as emotional armor.
Exactly. I don't use a straw man just to trick you. I use a straw man to trivialize your threatening viewpoint, making it look so absurd that my own brain doesn't have to seriously consider it.
And I use an ad hominem against you because it is infinitely easier to say you're just a biased, corrupt idiot than it is to look in the mirror and admit, wow, I might have based the last decade of my life on a completely false premise.
It reframes everything. These aren't just logic puzzles, they're survival tools for the ego. And humanity has been fighting this specific battle for a very long time. If you look at the historical context and the sources, you see this continuous thread. Aristotle wrote prior analytics over 2,000 years ago to try and codify this.
Wow, 2,000 years.
Yeah, John Locke tackled it during the Enlightenment. Richard Whately wrote extensive manuals in the 19th century on how to stop being manipulated by bad logic.
It is a war we have been fighting forever.
Yeah.
But what is truly fascinating to me is that the modern study of this, the actual frameworks we use today, called informal logic, didn't really take its current shape until the 1970s.
Right. With the emergence of the Windsor School in Canada, led by philosophers like Ralph Johnson and J. Anthony Blair, and the timing of that movement is not a coincidence. Think about the cultural context of North America in the late 1960s and early 1970s.
Right. It was an era of unprecedented social upheaval. You had the civil rights movement reaching a crescendo, massive violent protests against the Vietnam War, political assassinations, the counterculture movement, and eventually the Watergate scandal.
Exactly. And you have a generation of university students who are sitting in their dorm rooms, watching the evening news, listening to politicians and military leaders use incredibly sophisticated, highly manipulative rhetoric to justify bombing campaigns, systemic inequality, and domestic surveillance.
And then the next morning, those same students would walk into their university philosophy class.
And the professor would write a formal syllogism on the chalkboard. All A is B. Some C is A. Therefore, some C is B. Please solve for validity.
The disconnect must have been whiplash-inducing.
It felt entirely sterile and useless. The students essentially revolted against the curriculum. They demanded educational reform. They argued that learning the abstract math of logic was completely insufficient if it didn't give them the tools to critically analyze a politician lying on television or a propaganda campaign in the newspaper.
Which makes total sense.
It does. That intense demand for practical, real-world argument analysis is what birthed the modern informal logic movement.
They needed tools for the trenches, not the chalkboard. And out of that movement came some incredibly robust frameworks. The sources specifically highlight one called Pragma-dialectics, developed later by scholars like Frans van Ameren and Rob Grutendorst. I find this approach brilliant because it stops treating arguments like math equations and starts treating them like a structured game.
It's a highly practical, communication-based framework. Pragma-dialectics views an argument not as an abstract search for universal truth, but as a structured interaction, a game with specific rules designed for a critical discussion. The sole goal of this game is to resolve a difference of opinion fairly.
So within this framework, a fallacy isn't just a glitch in the matrix. It is a literal foul on the play.
Precisely. A fallacy is a violation of the agreed-upon rules of the game. Think of it like chess. Moving a pawn backward isn't a moral failing, but it is a rule violation. You simply cannot do it if you want to play chess.
Right.
In Pragma-dialectics, they outline very specific rules. For example, there's a freedom rule. You cannot prevent another party from advancing their true standpoint.
So when you deploy a straw man, you aren't just being sneaky. You're fundamentally breaking the freedom rule because you're denying them the right to present their actual nuanced case.
You're breaking the mechanics of the game, but as elegant as that framework is, it raises a massive, highly practical problem for the everyday person.
Which brings us to the most actionable part of our deep dive. Knowing that a fallacy is a rule violation in the game of conversation is great in theory. But how do you actually blow the whistle and call a foul in real life without just flipping the table over, screaming at your opponent, and ruining Thanksgiving?
It is the profound difference between knowing the rules of boxing while sitting on the couch and actually taking a punch in the ring.
One of the Reddit debaters in our sources summarized this paralysis perfectly. They wrote, "I know exactly what a straw man is on paper. I can spot it in an essay. But in a real-time argument, when someone uses one against me, my mind just goes completely blank. I freeze. How do I actually respond in the moment?"
So we need tactical countermoves. And looking at the consensus from lawyers, debate champions, and logic educators across our sources, there is one universal piece of advice that stands above the rest. Under no circumstances should you just name the fallacy.
So standing up at the city council meeting, pointing a finger and shouting ad hominem is not a winning strategy.
It is remarkably consistently ineffective. First of all, most of the general public does not know the Latin terms.
That's true.
It sounds incredibly pretentious. It immediately puts the other person on the defensive because they feel condescended to. And critically, it doesn't actually explain why their logic is broken. It just sounds like you are trying to win the argument on a technicality, like a pedantic referee.
So like shouting off sides. It's someone who has never watched a game of soccer in their life. They aren't going to adjust their strategy. They're just going to get angry at you. So if we abandon the Latin dictionary, what is the actual move?
The move is to identify the structural flaw internally and then articulate it externally in plain, accessible English. You have to pull the mask off the scarecrow.
Give me an example of that.
Sure. For example, the Rumi Educational Guide suggests that if someone hits you with a straw man, you don't say, "That is a straw man fallacy." You say something like, "It seems like you'd rather attack an imaginary argument than deal with the one I'm actually making."
Or even dial it down to be more conversational. Like, hold on, what are you talking about? I never said that. Here's what I actually said. Let's stick to that.
Exactly. You expose the misrepresentation without relying on academic jargon. And if they throw a red herring at you, the dead cat on the table, the tactic is to redirect and control the narrative.
How do you do that?
You briefly acknowledge the distraction so they feel heard, but you pivot immediately back to the core issue. Like, that is an interesting historical point about the mayor's past, but the issue we have to solve today is the zoning budget.
You absolutely refuse to chase the laser pointer.
Yeah.
And as we dig into the tactical advice from the Reddit threads, there's a fascinating tip about reading the physical tone of the argument. You have to learn to recognize blustering.
Yes, the bluster.
When an opponent suddenly gets much louder, their pitch goes up, they start speaking incredibly fast, or they get physically aggressive, it is very rarely a sign of confidence. It is usually a smokescreen. They're generating noise to cover up the fact that they just made a ridiculously unsupported point.
It's a conscious or subconscious intimidation tactic. They want to rush you past the weak link in their logic chain before you have time to examine it.
The advice from the trenches is to simply let them finish their bluster. Do not match their volume. Do not match their chaotic energy. Let them run entirely out of breath. Sit in silence for a second and then calmly ask them to clarify the actual logical steps of what they just yelled. It is very much like martial arts principles.
Using their momentum against them.
Exactly. You don't meet force with force. When they lunge at you with an invalid, highly aggressive attack, you don't block it directly. You step to the side. You let their own chaotic momentum carry them right past you, and then you gently redirect the conversation back to the center of the mat.
You maintain complete control of your own emotional state, which allows you to control the narrative.
But calling out bad logic, even politely, even gracefully, is fundamentally a defensive maneuver. It's damage control. It got me wondering, while reading these sources, what if there was an offensive, proactive method? A way to guide someone or even yourself out of a fallacious belief system entirely, without it devolving into a combative debate.
This is where we transition from informal logic into one of the most fascinating developments in modern conversational strategy. It's a framework called Street Epistemology.
This entirely blew my mind when I encountered it in the sources. It was originally developed and popularized by philosopher Peter Boghossian, and the core principle completely inverts how we normally approach disagreements.
It really does.
It's a highly structured conversational method aimed not at winning an argument and not even necessarily at changing someone's mind in the moment. The goal is simply to explore exactly why people believe what they believe and to map out the architecture of their conviction.
It takes the ancient Socratic method of asking probing questions and fuses it with modern behavioral psychology and de-escalation tactics.
And what makes it so unique is that it has this incredibly physical, almost game-like structure to it. I want to break down the 8-step method because, honestly, I want to try this at my next dinner party when things get heated.
Let's walk through it. How does the game start?
Step 1 is generating a claim. The moderator throws out a controversial statement. The example from the text is, homeschooling is a terrible idea.
A claim absolutely guaranteed to elicit strong, emotional, knee-jerk opinions from almost everyone in the room.
For sure. Then step 2 is where it gets physical. The moderator puts 7 actual lines of tape on the floor. It creates a physical spectrum. One end is strongly agree, the opposite end is strongly disagree, and there is a neutral line right in the middle.
Step 3 forces physical commitment. The participants are asked to stop talking and actually walk over to stand on the specific line of tape that represents their current belief regarding the claim.
Which is a brilliant psychological trick, because you can't hide behind vague rhetoric. You have to physically plant your feet and own your position relative to everyone else in the room. Then, step 4 introduces Socratic questioning.
Right, the probing part.
The moderator goes to the participants and simply asks why they chose that specific line. And critically, no one is allowed to debate them yet. It is purely about clarification. What do you mean by the word terrible? Can you elaborate on the experiences that brought you to this line?
This step forces people to verbally articulate the foundation of their belief. And very often, people realize in real time that they don't actually have data. They're relying entirely on vague feelings or anecdotes. But step 5 is where the absolute magic happens. It's called eliciting dissent, and it utilizes a concept called Rappaport's rules.
This is the ultimate weaponized straw man destroyer.
It really is. Rappaport's rule states that players on opposing sides of the spectrum must repeat the other person's argument back to them perfectly. They cannot proceed with the game. They cannot offer a critique until the opponent listens to the summary and says, yes, you understand my point completely and fairly.
You literally are not allowed to argue against a position until you have proven, to the satisfaction of your opponent, that you understand it. It completely neutralizes the straw man because you have to build a steel man, the strongest, most accurate version of their argument.
Which naturally leads to step 6, which relies on something called Alexander's question. The moderator turns to a participant and asks, what specific evidence would it take for you to move just one line over on this spectrum?
This is searching for satisfiable evidence. It forces the person to look inward and admit whether their belief is based on evidence that can be evaluated and measured, or if it is an unfalsifiable dogma that no amount of data could ever touch.
Step 7 is the collaborative phase. The rest of the group actually tries to provide that specific evidence, not to attack the person, but to meet the criteria they just laid out. And finally, step 8 is the open, non-judgmental dialogue phase, where the moderator acts as a referee to ensure the primary goal remains mutual understanding rather than claiming a tribal victory.
It's an incredible process. Why does this highly structured, slightly weird game work so well on a psychological level?
Because it's a masterclass in bypassing the amygdala. By utilizing steel manning and combining it with tactical empathy, genuinely trying to understand their lived experience, the method systematically lowers the psychological defenses we talked about earlier. It deactivates cognitive dissonance.
Because the participants don't feel like they're under attack.
Yeah.
Their identity isn't being threatened, so they don't need to throw up the protective armor of fallacies.
Exactly. When human beings feel genuinely heard and accurately, fairly represented, the fight-or-flight response switches off. They become capable of actual, analytical, higher-order thinking again. They can look at their own beliefs objectively.
I love this concept for a structured workshop, or a university classroom, or even corporate mediation. But I have to ask about the real-world application here. Is this realistic for everyday life? I can't exactly carry around a roll of masking tape and lay down 7 lines on the floor of a coffee shop when my friends start saying something crazy about the economy.
You cannot use the tape, no. And you can't enforce Rappaport's rules on a stranger. But the mindset of street epistemology is completely transferable to any conversation, anywhere. Specifically, utilizing Alexander's question from step 6. Asking someone calmly, genuinely, and without condescension, what specific evidence would it take to change your mind on this, is a conversational superpower.
Because the answer they give you reveals the entire architecture of how they're processing reality.
Precisely. Let's play it out. If you ask a friend what it would take to change their mind about a conspiracy theory, and they say, nothing, absolutely nothing could ever convince me otherwise. The data is all faked by the government. You have just saved yourself hours of agonizing frustration.
Yeah, you really have.
You know immediately that a logical debate is impossible. They aren't operating in the realm of logic. They're operating in the realm of religious faith or pure dogma.
You could just smile, take a sip of your coffee, and pivot to talking about sports or movies. You don't have to engage.
But if they give you a condition, if they pause and say, well, if you could show me a peer-reviewed, independent study that proves X, I would reconsider, you now have a roadmap. You have the agreed-upon terms for a rational, logical discussion. You aren't attacking their identity anymore. You're collaborating to find a specific piece of evidence.
It turns a combat scenario into a cooperative research project. So let's take a breath and unpack the immense amount of ground we've covered today. We started by decoding the architecture of error, learning that formal fallacies are broken math, and informal fallacies are broken materials.
Right.
We've explored the highly tactical, sneaky misdirections of strawmen, red herrings, and Motte-and-Bailey's. We dove into evolutionary biology to understand our pattern glitches, and we unpacked the acute cognitive dissonance that makes us crave these fallacies as protective emotional armor.
It's all connected.
And finally, we learned how to disarm them, dropping the pretentious Latin, sidestepping the bluster, and using the tools of street epistemology to actually foster genuine understanding.
And if there is one overarching thesis you take away from this entire deep dive, it's this. Mastering this mental toolkit is not about winning debates in the YouTube comment section. It is not about catching your uncle in a logical contradiction at dinner to feel superior.
No, not at all.
The ultimate value of this knowledge is internal. It's about auditing the massive information diet you consume every single day. It's about protecting your own mind from political, commercial, and social manipulation, and demanding a much higher standard of truth from the world around you.
Which brings up one final, slightly uncomfortable thought for you to mull over as we wrap up. We spend almost all of our time and energy learning how to spot logical fallacies in other people's arguments. We want the toolkit so we can catch them out, so we can defend ourselves. But consider this. What if the most dangerous fallacies you encounter aren't the ones your opponents use against you?
Oh, that's a chilling thought.
What if the most destructive fallacies, the most devastating strawmen and false causes, are the ones we use in the quiet of our own minds to justify our own bad habits, our own unexamined biases, and our own stagnant identities?
The invisible fallacies we use to protect ourselves from our own cognitive dissonance, the lies we tell ourselves so we don't have to change.
Exactly. So the next time you are making a major life decision or fiercely defending a deeply held belief, take a step back, turn the toolkit inward, and ask yourself, am I building my life on a foundation of sound structural reality, or am I just standing on a really convincing straw man?